Since 2000, SAHA has continued to uphold and promote human rights in South Asia, most of the time trying to overcome challenges due to the challenging political context that we live in, and restrictions on people-to-people contact and curtailment of our voices. Over the past 25 years, SAHA has been involved in advocacy on numerous human rights issues in the region, ranging from efforts to involve civil society in the peace negotiations on India and Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and also SAHA has worked on issues such as the Indian blockade in Nepal, to the unlawful intimidation of opposition members, including President Nasheed in the Maldives, and also ranging into issues such as on climate justice, such as the South Asians, such as the Sindh floods in Pakistan, and the relevance of COP to South Asian people, or our continuous call to stop the Rampal coal power plant in Bangladesh. SAHA has conducted research on nation-state boundaries and human rights issues in the border, on religious extremism, critical appraisal of SARC. SAHA's fact-finding missions with South Asian expertise have been welcomed, as they have been regarded as South Asian delegations being able to advocate with governments, as well as in some instances with the UN. SAHA was the only regional organization to immediately call for action in what happened in the Maldives in 2015, actions against authoritarianism in the Maldives, peace and reconciliation in Manipur, where SAHA sent a regional fact-finding mission to Manipur, on the Rohingya refugees and their issues with the host Bangladeshi community. Also, SAHA's strength lies in its convening power and the ability to connect activists across South Asia, to assist them in learning from each other on various issues ranging from digital rights all the way up to the protection of human rights defenders. As most organizations in South Asia, SAHA today also operates under constant pressure, facing various forms of harassment even within Sri Lanka, restrictions on visas and travel to conduct our work, reduction in funding for regional activism, and our members have faced threats to personal safety and attempts to silence their work through legal and political obstacles. They have been harassed, imprisoned, have been compelled to go on self-exile, and in some cases have even sacrificed their lives in pursuit of justice. Their resilience, however, continues to remind us that the struggle for human rights cannot be extinguished. I would also want to take this moment to remember the work that all the human rights organizations across South Asian countries do, and to remember that it is not distance, but it is a shared responsibility, as most of the common issues spill over to the region. We must remember their courage and commitment, which calls us to unite to strengthen regional and international solidarity, and to ensure that the principles of justice, equality, and freedom are not just ideals, but realities for us all. With this note, I would like to begin this panel discussion by inviting Dilrukshi Handunnetti to moderate the panel. Dilrukshi will, of course, is known to all of us and needs no introduction. Can I also call the panelists to come up on stage? Ms. Jilani, Dr. Syeda Hameed, Dr. Roshmi Goswami, Sultana, Kamal, and we have a new member who was not in our invite list, but who decided to come at the very last minute, Kanak Dixit from Nepal.
So welcome everyone, all of you, to this panel discussion. And I know our speakers do not need any introduction, but I think it is my 2 minutes opportunity to explain as to why we are doing this. For a lot of us, South Asia is a passion. It's something that people commit to, but we also feel that we have unique challenges and things that we want to do. Before I really introduce the panel, I have 5 of them right here. I'll just read out a small introduction to this panel discussion. South Asia is besieged by pervasive issues like ethnic and political violence, interstate and intrastate conflicts, human rights violations, terrorism, and religious extremism. These conflicts stem from complex historical, geopolitical, and economic factors, including unresolved border disputes, colonial legacies, and ethnic and cultural conflicts. The region is ongoing turmoil, contributing to high levels of poverty and significant economic costs due to violence. More recently, South Asia witnessed an escalation in hostility between India and Pakistan. Youth uprisings driving regime change in countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. We also have fragile democracies and public institutions, information wars, autocratic rulers, governance crisis, systemic corruption, and a public trust deficit. All of that making a complex region extremely complex to work in, and the number of issues that we have. These issues further highlight the need for a very vibrant civil society, which is why we have 5 speakers. I know that all of you know about all of them, but we would want to just have a small introduction. Anusha is ready with that. It's easier to have the bios going up, but I would like to introduce the panelists in the speaking order. Ms. Hina Jilani is a lawyer at the Supreme Court of Pakistan and a human rights defender from Lahore. She co-founded AGHS Legal Aid Cell, Pakistan's first all-women's law firm, its first legal aid center, and the Women's Action Forum and advocacy group to campaign against discriminatory legislation. And our next speaker, again in the speaking order, is Dr. Roshmi Goswami, who is a feminist and human rights activist, well known for her pioneering work on women in armed conflict situations, documenting and analyzing the impact of war and conflict on the lives of women in the conflict-affected regions of India. There's much more, but here's the bio to save time. Then we have Dr. Syeda Hameed, who's this, Sultana. Ms. Sultana Kamal, a lawyer and a human rights activist from Bangladesh. She was an advisor to the Caretaker government between October to December 2006. We have her bio here for all of you. And then we move on to Dr. Syeda Hameed. Dr. Hameed is a social and women's rights activist, educationist, writer, and a former member of the Planning Commission of India. Last but not the least, we also have Kanak Dixit, who is the founding editor of Himal South Asian, writer, civil rights, heritage, and public transport activist, and best-selling children's author. Thank you for being here. So to get started with the discussion, I think I'll go to Hina first. We've been talking a lot this morning as well about the challenges we face as civil society, the new challenges, the old challenges all of you have faced, and the new challenges that we seem to be facing. Do you think we have lost our relevance in some way?
I think in response to your, first of all, thank you everyone for being here, and I hope that you will be here throughout the event so that we can open our hearts to you and talk to you about not just the current challenges that we have, but also remember that the old ones still linger. So the kind of feeling of being overwhelmed with crises and new and emerging threats to human rights, to peace and democracy are a bigger challenge than they might have been in the past. The life of a human rights defender is never without challenges. So we never kind of think of things in a manner in which the bigger challenges and the more serious crises frustrate us. As we all have been saying throughout our lives, we cannot afford either the pessimism or we cannot afford cynicism either. So whatever has happened in the world gives us more energy to think about how we can overcome those difficulties rather than being cynical about it and saying this is what is happening. I think our bigger challenge nowadays, and I don't know if everybody will agree with me on that, is the mindset of our populations. That mindset really determines the way that leaders act, because leaders today are not really leaders. They are populists who have no ideology and no belief, but choose to say things where they think they can please the population, whether that's human rights friendly, whether that's something that is based on principles that promote and protect democracy and democratic institutions. It's very different. So just to conclude by answering your question precisely, there are new and emerging threats. We have been dealing with previous threats. We haven't necessarily had solutions to everything that we found as a challenge. The new and emerging ones have drawn us again with more energy into sitting together, consulting each other, talking to each other in order to find a solution for these. We do that in a peaceful manner, but never without strength. And I think that's very important. We may be peaceful, but the importance that we give to our reaction, to our responses for what is happening around us is firstly to be very clear in our vision of where we want to go as human rights defenders and promoters of democracy, and being very firm on our positions, being very committed to exposure of governmental failures, being very committed to disassociate with any activity amongst non-state actors that is based on violence, on hatred, on division, rather than the celebration of the diversity which all South Asian countries enjoy.
Thank you. I'll move to Roshmi next. Yeah. So we've been having these discussions around Manipur and the kind of violence that we saw and the reasons for it. Or whether we have all the answers, we wouldn't know. But there seems to be a generation that is, moving their activism from offline to online. There is a lot of activity there. At the same time, there is this sense of, loss of faith in public institutions, in democracy, some of the values we speak to. How do you look at that?
Thank you. It's a complex question, but I'll try. For those of you who don't know where Manipur is in northeast, situated in northeast India, bordered by Myanmar, about 400 kilometers with the Myanmar border. And since 2023 May, there has been the outburst of unprecedented violence, primarily between two communities. One community called the Metes and the other the Kukis. The Kukis are tribal communities and the Metes live in the valley. Manipur was not part of the Indian Union. In 1947, it was a kingdom. And there was an instrument of merger with the Indian Union, which left many issues unattended and unanswered. So it is an incomplete story. So, I can't go into all the details, but it begins from something like that. There has been very, very brutal violence committed initially by one side, but then thereafter in a very targeted manner on both sides. And yes, as you say, that social media has played a very important role. First of all, in inciting the violence, and fake news, inciting the violence, and South Asians for Human Rights, we've done actually a fact-finding on the impact of social media on violence there. But on the other hand, and I'm not very good with social media, so we have to depend on younger people and people like Dilrukshi who understand this better, is that on the one hand, the violence was instigated through social media posts. But on the other hand, because of a very autocratic system that we have in India today, that immediate knee-jerk response of the government is to have an internet clampdown. So the internet was cut. So on the one hand, therefore, there was no information sharing for a long period of time. And during that period, there were cases of very brutal violence, and social media was in some instance the only evidence that we have. So we are grappling with, on the one hand, social media is used as the instigator of violence, and on the other hand, that it is the only evidence we have of, kind of convicting or taking people to court. So that's the kind of grappling that one is doing with the instance of Manipur. Now, the Northeast has always been kind of disillusioned with mainstream India, whether it is government or whether it is now even more so even with civil society. So that tension continues, and there have been self-determination movement and so on. But the younger generation, and even in this case in Manipur, there has been real polarization, even from mainstream India, on which instead of finding a solution to the conflict between two warring sides, there is often, we come to a stage where people take positions. And I have had to grapple with people who say, but this side has suffered more violence, and therefore our support has to be for them because they have suffered more violence. As a human rights activist and advocate, for me, those kind of questioning is very difficult to handle. It's a not case of who has suffered more or who has suffered less. Whoever has suffered has to be brought to justice. Whoever is the perpetrator has to be brought to justice. And we, as people from outside, we have to enable a process of coexistence between the two communities. So these are some of the issues that one is grappling with. Now, when you ask about the younger people, recently a big fact-finding was done by an Indian team, and the fact-finding report was good in many ways, but it also again brought about a divide rather than a kind of bringing the two communities together. It kind of further created deeper divides. And in all of this, what for me was interesting was the youth on both sides are pretty fed up with the older approaches. The typical, you have fact-finding, people go and do fact-finding, come back, you have a room full of very eminent people, of judges and others, you do a release, and that kind of gets endorsed as the official position on the issue. And the youth on both sides of the divide, this is a very deep divide, have actually both questioned and rejected this approach. And for them, it is not about who has been more violated against. It is for them to have a sense of freedom, and they are not bothered about separations. They are concerned about freedoms for themselves. And this is the kind of positioning that I came away with. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Thank you. It's a conversation, so all of us can contribute. I'll move to Sultana now. I just want to draw from what Hina and Roshmi both said. Hina said, we are strong, but we are peaceful. We want to maintain peace, but it doesn't mean we're weak. And Roshmi did say that young people are getting kind of tired of the kind of civil society action you've seen. So they want to pursue their own path. We've seen Bangladesh, and we've seen regime change being done. You have an interim government. People look forward to an election in the coming year and want to know whether it's a possibility or whether it's really going to happen next year. Going back to the civil society question, so what is it that the young people would want to fix in Bangladesh that the other civil society, the more organized civil society, could not fix? Or is it something, or do we have some generational issue where we cannot work together, or do we speak the same language?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to all who have come to this session to listen to us. It's a very complex question again. I mean, let me start from where the new generation started, okay? We had a quote-unquote revolution in July 2024, and there was a lot of hope in the people's mind, because even though Awami League was a very popular party, Sheikh Hasina was a very popular prime minister, but somehow or other over time they transformed themselves into a very autocratic entity, okay, both the party and Sheikh Hasina herself. So that's why people were sincerely, very earnestly wanting a change, no doubt about that. And most of the people who were sensitive to democracy or human rights questions, they were also looking at the revolution as an opportunity, okay? But you say that there's no blanketed young generation in Bangladesh. There are many different fragments, very different segments and sections. So I don't know who actually represent the younger generation in Bangladesh now. Because we see that the people who were in the forefront of the revolution, they are kind of disappearing. The women are totally invisible now. We don't see any of the women who led the revolution now in any decision-making position or in any prominent position. And there are many different groups who are influencing the government. Okay, we have an interim government now led by Professor Yunus, who is a Nobel laureate, and he has his cabinet where we have at least 5 proclaimed human rights defenders. But the human rights situation, the law and order situation is in a very precarious condition. And no one is taking charge of really bringing any remedy to that. Okay, that is something we have to see. And the younger generation we have now in Bangladesh, I'm very sad to make this statement that we don't know what their vision is, what they want for themselves. The regime change has happened. Some of them are in power. They're doing a lot of powerful things in the society, like many of the groups, they are dictating who will be the vice chancellor of universities, who will teach in the university, who will be the teachers in the primary schools, and the judiciary was totally kind of changed, and we don't know who these judges are. They are very junior lawyers from different places without any experience, because there has been a system, there's a procedure to appoint judges in the courts, even in the High Court. People are not sure that who these people are. There's a complete collapse of the judiciary. The institutions, we were complaining during Sheikh Hasina's time also that the institutions are being polluted, the institutions are being destroyed. But now there's complete collapse of the institutions. And nobody knows who is in charge. Is it the army? Is it the government? Or it's the people who are creating mobs in every section of the society? And the government is calling them pressure groups, that they're not mobs, they're pressure groups. So whatever is happening, when we complain about it, the government's response is that we are not doing it. It's the pressure group who's doing it. And hundreds of people are languishing in jails. People who had been perceived or accused of having remotest connection with the previous government, or having some privilege or benefit during that government. And no trial is being held, so we can say that there are hundreds of people in jail without trial for more than a year now. And when we spoke to the highest authority about it, they said, yeah, that's their punishment. Let it be like that. So this is the attitude of the government. So, I mean, people's life can be in danger because of commission of crimes by somebody or some commissions, and also by omissions. It's the government's omissions that is creating more problem in the lives of the people in Bangladesh than the commissions of the crimes. They're not doing anything. We don't have any protector now. Nobody protects us. If there's any, attack on us, we don't know where to go. The police will not take the case. No, the lawyer will not want to help us because they're harassed in the court if they do. The judges will give judgments against us. I give you one example here. Sorry, if I'm taking too long, please stop me. I give you one example. Only recently, a group was organizing a meeting on 71. They call them Moncho 71, Stage 71, okay? So there were a few very senior politicians also, not from Awami League. And Dr. Kamal Hossain, you know, many of you know him. He was supposed to preside that meeting. So he didn't come because he's not well. Anyway, so some people came and vandalized the meeting. The people who were organizing the meeting, they were arrested by police and they were given anti-state charges against them. And those who vandalized are let free. So this is the situation in Bangladesh. Nobody knows why a person is arrested. And another example, freedom of expression. There's one person who is a very popular speaker in the talk shows. So one day he was sitting with somebody, and a young person, maybe one of the student leaders, he said that I don't consider Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to be the father of the nation. I don't agree with that. So the other person said that, yeah, you may not agree. He was very, very casual. Yes, you may not agree, but I think he was the father of the nation. He was arrested the next day. So this is the condition of freedom of expression in Bangladesh now. So to sum up, the civil society is to, yes, I mean, also it depends what do you mean by the civil society, the word civil society. Yeah, there are people who are speaking. There are people who are attending the talk shows, giving their opinions, but no one is say anything in favor of, or say arguing in favor of Awami League or Bangabandhu, or anything to do with the past regime. They will be arrested immediately and they'll just put in jail without trial for any number of days. Nobody knows how long. And as I said, the judiciary is also not very kind of, we can't really hope the judiciary will be standing beside the oppressed or those who are being kind of, arrested like that arbitrarily or being persecuted by the government or the non-government, non-state agents. So that's there. And to come back to the civil society question, I mean, people are not speaking. Plain and simple, people are not speaking. They're not speaking because they don't know what will the consequence be for them.
Thank you. I'll move to Syeda now. So last year we saw India and Pakistan almost, take the entire region to war, so to speak. Whatever that happens in both your countries will have an impact on the rest of South Asia. And there is always a resonance. All of us are concerned about the response of governments as well as civil society. Do you think, what was the response that you saw to the situation last year, to the violence? Was there enough action? What else could we have done differently?
Thank you very much, Dilrukshi. I'm also very grateful, like all my colleagues, that you came for a little while in the evening to listen to us. For 25 years, some of us have been part of South Asians for Human Rights. And I remember massive 700 South Asians coming to Delhi I remember huge conventions, South Asians and Pakistanis, especially since it's Pakistan, 100 Pakistanis marching in Calcutta to the blessing of the Chief Minister of West Bengal. That was a time, and this is a time where I, as a Kashmir born, I have a double whammy. I'm a Muslim, triple whammy. I'm a woman, I'm a Muslim, and I'm a Kashmir born. So that's, it's something which I deal with every day. I was holding some positions in the government. It was a different story. But for 11 years, it's been a complete stifling. And I can say this as Hina said. I remember her sister, who was always by my side, and now she is no more, who taught me a lot of things, though she was younger than me. What Hina said, I echo that, what Roshmi said, Sultana said. It's like a repeat of everything in India. We have, right now, one of the biggest states is going to election. There is a huge predicament which is raised by the opposition, particularly the leader of the opposition. Vote chori, stealing of votes. It's so big, but all the instruments of government are totally and completely subjugated to the highest authority. There is really very little that we see a kind of a bleak future. But in right now, as far as India is concerned. But I feel, as my colleagues feel, that if South Asia was to wake up, and the kind of bonding that we had 25 years ago, we were beginning to bond, and now it's Operation Sindoor. And Operation Sindoor is a word, is a well-known word, but it is the red mark that women wear when they are married. And mostly Hindu women, maybe some Bangladeshi women also wear it. Oh, okay. And that, that is the whole, the feminization, the gender in that Operation Sindoor. It is because, your sisters and your mothers are being annihilated, and they are being, they are being butchered. So that is the crux of the message. I feel that, Dilrukshi has asked a very, very important question. And I think that my feeling is that this Operation Sindoor, which was occurred in Pahalgam, that is my birthplace, that is entirely my birthplace. The most beautiful part, one of the most beautiful parts of the world, it's become a living hell now. From the Jannat, which is like a heaven, bliss, it's become a union territory. It's very hurting for Kashmiris. So, the hurt persists. We are all writhing in a sense, but I feel, a sense, I mean, you have your problems in Sri Lanka, there are a lot of problems, but it gives us a sense of peace and equanimity to come here. So I feel that this South Asians for Human Rights, the whole idea that was born 25 years ago, 26 years ago, is a very charismatic and a wonderful seed that can once again flower and become something which we can cherish, and that will still take us out of this morass that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you. So Kanak, Nepal has really surprised us. It was supposed to, we only saw the news reports and there's a lot of conflicting theories about it. Young people, hitting streets only because 26 social media platforms were banned, and then Gen Z protested and said, no, it's much more than that. So please don't confine it to that issue. What are the lessons from Nepal? And we would want to hear from you.
Well, I think we're still, thank you, Dilrukshi, and hello everyone. I think we're still in the throes of transition, so too early to talk about lessons from Nepal. One might actually say, what are the lessons Nepal can learn from the rest of South Asia? And I might preface my reply by first making that point. Sri Lanka with the Argalaya and the students' movement that toppled the regime in Bangladesh, and then the following disillusionment and disappointment. When will the disappointment and delusion begin in Nepal is what we should be marking, because it's bound to happen when not just youngsters, but society as a whole has not been, or at least the educated classes, don't have humanities education, are not taught political science, are not taught geography, are not taught aspects of philosophy in school or in college. And you always only are taught to lionize STEM and then to just move into the area. And so the frustrations rise because you don't have context. You don't have comparative analysis of situations. And on top of that, you got all over South Asia, you got the algorithm-driven populism. And I believe that not only our political leaders, but our civil society have not understood how to grapple with this, while our youth in particular are using it, but without an understanding of context and perspectives. So and that leads to movements and then disillusionment. Then just a quick reference to India and Pakistan, which are a different category within South Asia. The largest country in the world by population and the 6th largest country. In many ways, the three of our smaller societies are better able to manage even if there is explosion and implosion, management happens a little quicker just because of the scale. But these larger countries, if you count the distress within the countries, societal distress, economic distress, social distress, discriminations, marginalizations, it's something in a global scale. And so you take all of South Asia and we're in a mess. And we have to get out of it. There's no two ways. Now to Nepal. I think best is for me to give you a chronological readout of the events so that you know it's still happening. As I say, the cabinet is still being formed. It was something only 13 days ago that we had this protest, and then the next day, 12 days ago, was an explosion, and then we're picking up the pieces as we speak. So on the 8th of September, the youth, the so-called Gen Z groups, because Gen Z means an entire generation across the country, but some groups that were active, particularly on social media, for example, using Reddit and Discord, app I didn't know existed till 10 days ago, right? They were using this to organize an event to protest the government's suspension of 26 social media platforms, including the Meta platforms, which means Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and YouTube and a few others, including Discord. Of course, the youngsters found the VPN ways to bypass it, but that was not as easy to do. The government, what it had done was it had suspended them, saying simply, please register your contact point in Nepal so that we can do investigations into cybercrime easier. There may also have been some incipient desire in the government to control social media, but frankly, it was clear that the moment, let's say, Facebook appointed a contact person in Nepal, the suspension would be lifted. Nevertheless, the government planned without knowing the anger in the populace, suddenly unable to communicate, small businesses not able to utilize their, the social platform, and overseas Nepalis and those working in India unable to communicate. They could have moved to Viber and TikTok, which had registered contact persons and were not suspended. Nevertheless, that is the scenario in which the youngsters decided to call a dharna, a movement, and a sit-down in downtown Kathmandu on the 8th of September, 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Now, let me tell you, in a capsule, everything that has happened in Nepal has happened on the basis of that 3 hours of peaceful sit-down. How did it accelerate and get so out of hand, become so violent? It seems that the police was lax in providing security of our parliament building. The organizers actually announced midway through the program, we have been infiltrated, some of the organizers, because there are many organizers, we've been infiltrated, go home in peace. We have won the day, quote unquote. But the crowd had swelled, perhaps with a lot of groups that were not part of Gen Z, but that had been sent there by groups that were rallied against both the coalition government of the Nepali Congress and CPN-UML, as well as groups that were against the system itself of secular democratic republic, secular federal democratic republic of Nepal. All these values represented in that constitution, the royalists, the ex-Maoists, the Hindutva-oriented, RSS-linked entities in Nepal, perhaps had been waiting for such a moment. We don't know. They don't come out with the press release. But the crowd did swell. They moved towards Parliament. The police did not stop them with the regular riot control measures. And until they reached the Parliament building, and then firing began, and 19 were dead on the spot. And that should have been enough for Prime Minister Oli to resign. Prime Minister Oli, just days previously, had been to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and the Victory Day Parade. I think that was 3rd September. He came back. He also attended a big conference of his own party, where he rode high. He set himself to be the next chairman of the party, which meant also that he would be the power and the boss for the next few years. So he was at that height, having done international travel. He was meant to meet Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, in Bihar a few days ago. That was his agenda, and suddenly he descended from that height, and he was forced to resign. Why was he forced to resign? Now I'll get back to the chronology. 8th, there were 19 dead. You knew, therefore, for Nepal, 19 dead in one event, like in any country in South Asia, was massive. It was grievous, challenge to the system and to humanity itself. The next day, the Prime Minister was forced to resign by the army, saying they could not provide him with security unless he resigned. There was a power vacuum for a whole 8 to 12 hours, 8 to 10 hours after the Prime Minister resigned. In that period, mayhem ensued. It seemed to be a planned attack on the institutions of state, into attack on political personages of this coalition government. So everything that could bring down the government and what could bring down the state, which meant our coming into Colombo yesterday, which I, by the way, I found extremely civilized coming from where I am at this point. But going through the presidential palace, is the big steps, is that the presidential palace, Dilrukshi? The steps leading into the secretariat. I remember from the Argalaya, the people moving into the secretariat, walking through, looking at everything and walking out. In Nepal, it was arson, looting, first the looting, then the arson of individual houses of politicians across the country, customs offices, land administration, whatever you may call it. Finally, within Nepal, within Kathmandu, the government secretariat called Singha Darbar, which is essentially a representation of the Nepali state, the Supreme Court, as well as the Parliament building. All of them were torched. Nobody to save these buildings. They essentially burned into ember late at night. No fire tenders, no army, no police, nothing. Only mobs raging through. How did it happen? I'll end at this point. How was it allowed to happen? We don't know yet. I can tell you that there was dissatisfaction. Nepal is, the Nepali communication is in the Nepali language. We don't have the English to vernacular divide. So in that, with the social scientists taking a back seat and not providing comparative perspective, people have got this rock solid belief that Nepal is a failed state, that they don't know how it's next door. They don't know that if you look at somebody else, you may just think that we're not doing as badly, but people have been convinced that Nepal is doing very poorly, and it's the government, the leaders that are at fault. And then comes the word corruption. There was conspicuous consumption by the children and grandchildren of the leadership. And in the days of social media, that was the electrifying element, and it just went out of hand. Is there any foreign involvement? I would like to think that there are enough entities outside Nepal wanting to take advantage of situation, because Nepal is strategically an important country. But most likely, these are homegrown opportunists that were so organized that they could work to try and destroy the current government as well as the system of government. That's how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanak. Thank you all. So I think it's time for question and answer. Let's open to the audience. Has anyone got a question to ask any of our speakers? Yeah? No, it's okay.
I'll speak to Kanak's, because Nepal has been very close to my heart and experience as well. The way the collapse of the government was presented was different in the international media. So I'm happy to hear your explanation. It was as if, Gen Z had suddenly discovered, and they were tweeting around the corruption stories or ostentatious corruption of the children of politicians. And then social media was clamped down to clamp the spread of these stories, and that is when it all erupted. So it was interesting to hear from you that it was the registration issue. That sounds very boring, almost, to say they just wanted you to register. But we live in a world where people are very cynical, and you believe that the moment you register, you are exposing yourself to government and to control. So there is a confidence issue to have. I mean, many countries do ask you to register. I mean, your mobile number is registered. There is a point of contact. But
to me, it's a larger question is we so distrust our governments now that even if they say white is white, people will no longer believe them. So regaining trust in any of the South Asian governments is the biggest challenge, because we are open to any conspiracy theory because of their past record too. So this is, a real challenge. And as to what you had all said about the loss of South Asian solidarity, I too remember all these. I mean, we learned from each other, and because we met and we had these convening spaces to come to. Now it seems that Sri Lanka is the only convening space, but these things come and go. So that's important for us to recognize.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes, Omar? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Sakuntala raised, I really want to get to this question about the role of non-governmental organizations, organized civil society, conventional civil society. What's the way forward? Because on the one hand, there's universal disenchantment with the old political establishment, rejection, we see that. Even new formations, political formation seems to mimic to an extent the old, the establishments. Organized civil society has done very good work, but the reach is limited, we know that. And youth wants something else. So what's the way forward is what it is. I'm just wondering whether, social movements, I mean, India has strong social movements. Many of the countries in South Asia have strong social movements. Is that the way forward? And if that's the case, how do you refine the idea of social movements to be able to respond? So what Kanak pointed out, social scientists playing a major role, all sorts of, thinkers, activists, playing a role, because I also do believe, just observing the Sri Lankan Aragalaya, what the Aragalaya achieved, it was very different in character to what, I think transpired in Bangladesh and Nepal, as far as I know. We have to study it further, but it's in spite of the organized civil society. It's as if you can't deal with this sort of, deeply entrenched corruption and misgovernance. So we will take it over. And what happened was something utterly beautiful, in my opinion, in the first few months. It was extremely spontaneous, very, very multi-ethnic, multi-religious. One of the first things was to eschew, divisions, all of that. So I think we have to grapple with this issue,
Is there anyone in particular you would like to?
I think people have different ideas, perhaps, from what I would be saying. There are different kinds of experiences. What we see, for instance, in these kind of uprisings and the very optimistic and very kind of exciting moments that we see, like in what happened in Egypt, what happened in Tunisia, and I was very closely watching these and have been a part of certain organizations who've had missions in these two countries to see what the Arab Springs brought about. Total devastation. So, you'd say, what does the young generation want? In many ways, I think we experience different things. I would be very concerned in giving the young generation in my country, for instance, or a majority of them, what they want. And it's not a generational issue. If we are a part of the women's movement, and I totally believe in a movement rather than in what we call an NGO culture. And we were just discussing it this afternoon, and I was sharing my views, that NGOs have to perform work which feeds a movement. If they fail to do that, then they become irrelevant. NGOs have no legitimacy. People don't elect them to represent their views. Their legitimacy comes from the relevance of their work to what realities we want to change on the ground and what kind of society and political systems, social and political systems that we want to emerge out of the struggles and the strife that we carry out. So I think there are different experiences. I have not seen an uprising so far which has brought the expected results. I have not also seen uprisings so far which were not backed or perhaps driven by interest groups that have perhaps backed some of the initial spontaneous reaction to anything. From what I hear about the Nepal thing, it started as a 3-hour dharna and became total chaos. This doesn't happen just through the aspirations of some well-meaning people who have become frustrated with a long-lasting authoritarianism or misgovernance. This actually happens when there are those who are using a moment that may be very genuine to drive something else. So these are some of the things we have to keep in mind. I am never kind of exuberant about these uprisings. And I think the best way that we can serve the public at large is to be able to get a proper analysis. We can't do it without journalists. Niresh is sitting there, you are there, who will do this investigation, bring out the facts, and the civil society has an obligation to look at those facts, do an analysis, and be able to show the people what the probabilities were in these kind of uprisings. So there is no one lens that should always be applied to this. Secondly, as a human rights defender, however noble a cause it may be, I abhor violence. And I think that cause loses its credibility and its attraction if you do it in a violent way. So these are some of the things which, when I said in the morning, just in the beginning in my first response, I think that the whole question before us and the challenge is, how will people deal with their frustrations? And these frustrations will never end. You'll never have a perfect government. You'll never have perfect leadership. So we have to understand how we can achieve a particular goal to satisfy our frustration, and how do we take out our frustration? In what way? So I agree with what you're saying, but I also add, and sorry for taking time, to my response, going back to why South Asia. Why are we concerned about South Asia? We are concerned about South Asia because, do not forget, there are 2 nuclear powers in this country. 2 nuclear countries, 2 countries with nuclear weapons. I know for sure that neither of these 2 countries will be irresponsible enough to use these weapons. But what can we predict about the future? Sometimes somebody's pure frustration will trigger something like a nuclear war. Pakistan has a tendency of adventurers taking over. We can't promise which adventurer will think it's to their benefit to use and trigger off a nuclear war. So this is a very important region in that context. There are hostilities, long-lasting ones, with very serious and complex issues, which are the cause of those hostilities. And it is therefore absolutely important. And that is one of the primary
themes on which SAHR, South Asians for Human Rights, concentrates. Peace. My whole life has been devoted to creating a network of people across South Asia to give the message of peace. Of course, things haven't worked out the way we want. India and Pakistan, we made a beautiful relationship with Indian human rights activists, lawyers, journalists. But because of the inability to move across the border, those relationships, in many ways, kind of, they don't get broken, but the ability to understand, to think, to brainstorm on solutions is not possible through the Zoom meetings that we have. This person-to-person contact and the people-to-people contact is absolutely essential for South Asia. So freedom of movement in South Asia across borders, a realization that human rights may be universal, but they are not just universal. Human rights, respect for human rights for people across the border is also universal. Every country has the obligation to respect the human rights of everyone. So these are some of the messages that I think the younger generation needs to hear. From my experience, because I know that in our generation there is impatience, the younger people, and I keep thinking this is the future. And when I think of the future, it frightens me.
Yeah, I just wanted to, what I see is these upheavals of the young people, the uprising in 3 countries, and we've just come back from Bangladesh where we went to do an assessment. So that is one level of, turmoil. But I also think that at this moment, our generation, also there is a need to really reflect and look inwards, because we have, as you pointed out, you have the NGOs and you have the movements. But actually, the divide is not so clear. I mean, the lines are blurred, right? I mean, there was a period, for instance, in India, the autonomous women's movement never took funding. They were very clear, right? Then over a period of time, when there were progressive donors and so on, they did begin to take funding. And now in India, what are they grappling with? You have this overarching oppressive regime, and everyone's concern is either to remove the regime or grapple with the imposition that it, on a daily basis almost, imposes on civil society organizations. So you have a section who were part of movements who are now funded, are constantly in a state of anxiety because of rules and regulations. The FCRA, just recently, again they come up, you can't have XYZ on your board. So it's endless demands of people. At the same time, there is a deep realization that no work in India today is worth anything really, unless it is political in nature, because it has to be political, it has to address the oppression, it has to, and all of that which comes with it. So you have the movements who are very clearly political movements or other movements, and then you have, and the women's groups I find are the most conflicted, caught between being an NGO, well-regulated, conforming to every rule and regulation, versus coming out openly and saying, we are part of this political movement. So that is a crisis at the moment. I don't have any answers, but it is a crisis, and one can see it, and the self-censorship of people who otherwise speak out, and I will not name them, but these were feminists who always took positions and spoke out, and now it's kind of, it's that voice is petering down. And there are reasons for this petering down. So we are in a crisis. Our generation, we are in a crisis, and it's important that we recognize that crisis. On the opportunity side, and with my, clear kind of position on Gaza, Palestine also provides a different kind of opportunity. And in India, I find that it is the younger people, because India again clamps down very heavily on any support for Gaza. And I'm part of a group, and it's all young people. They don't care. They are the ones out on the street. So, we have to look at also the opportunities that this kind of, and what is interesting is that Gaza has also thrown up issues of deep hypocrisy, which the younger people reject. It also has thrown up issues of racism, of the entire human rights, architecture, how racist, how colonial, and how double standard it has been in all this while. So that, I think we have to take cognizance of, that these are some of the driving forces of how we go forward. And lastly, I'll just end with that. As South Asians and as South Asians for human rights, we also think it is a moment, it is an opportune moment to reset the human rights discourse and how we go about doing human rights. And this morning also we had interesting kind of, given all the messiness of our region, I also think South Asia provides very, very innovative thinking and very sharp analysis of what should be done or what is the context. And I think with that we can go forward with setting, but it has to be a South Asian reset of human rights for the world, not just for South Asia, for everyone. We should be the leaders, leading now on of how human rights should look like or what it should look like.
Thank you. There are 3 questions. I think we'll collect the questions and we'll be very brief with the answers. We'll come to Oma and then to Nimalka and then to Naresh, in that order.
Yeah. Hi, Oma from Factum. Excellent panel, but the question that I have is perhaps to Kanak or Sultana. We are also talking as a group panel whether we need to reflect on how the rights community has looked at rights overall and uprisings. My question is, would there be a benefit for us as we talk track 1.5 now to also trump up our learning of what the Sri Lankan uprising was and have those learnings shared at state level as well, so state to state? Because we try and speak within civil society quite a lot, but the power and authority we have to effect some of those changes are very limited. And like Kanak, you also mentioning Sri Lanka could be the only beacon of post-uprising within quote, I'll say normalcy. I mean, we are not perfect yet, but then world over, this could be one of those examples. Would there be a benefit in getting the state involved at some level? Because at civil society level and other levels, the reach and the outreach we have is fairly limited.
So that's to Kanak and to Sultana, right? Okay. Nimalka, I'll collect the questions first.
Thank you very much, and it is a happy day to see all our colleagues with whom we have walked the journey of peace and struggle of human rights in South Asia. What I want to sort of pose is our struggles and our activism, while within South Asia, was also globally linked to the UN system. We derived certain principles, certain experiences as human rights activists from the global system. So has the global, this is a question that we are raising, seeing Gaza, seeing Ukraine. Has the global system failed? Is the global system still relevant to us? And when you talk about bringing human rights activism from within South Asia, we've had this Asian human rights discourse, and we all opposed that in 1993. in Vienna, partly because we all knew what the South Asian countries were talking about. The universality of human rights got challenged. So I want to know, I mean, I know we are all grappling, but there's a sense that there's no point in Geneva, there's no point in UN, in the horrors that we see in Gaza. At times, the activists, the victims, they still go to, there is a pilgrimage for protection. There is this big UN which is supposed to be protecting us. But in the face of Gaza, how do we reconcile that?
Thank you. That's for Roshmi to answer. Yeah. Okay. Anyone. Okay. Then
And
to
Hina,
Okay.
and
anyone.
Roshmi,
All right.
and Kanak, anybody.
Okay. So next, I'll collect your question as well, Niresh, and then maybe we can quickly go around and answer the questions.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure whom to address this to because it's such an eminent panel. But my question is this: 3 years, 3 revolutions, all in South Asia. How did this come about where the rulers or those in office were caught napping? Why were they so disconnected from their populations? I mean, you can call it Gen Z or young people or whatever, but Gen Z are just the people who carried it out, who were the backbone of it perhaps, but the discontent, I think, was for the most part throughout the populations, I mean, certainly in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. So let's start with Kanak.
So the last question, onward to the first one. On the last one, I think I may have referred to a kind of an answer to your question in that our societies are not, and our rulers are maybe incompetent, but some of them were not despicable. Others may have been. It's a spectrum. Like when people say the Prime Minister of Nepal was autocratic, that's KP Oli. He was not autocratic in the spectrum where Sheikh Hasina was autocratic. And Rajapakshas may be somewhere in between, right? So I believe that, and so each ruler in these 3 countries, which you termed a revolution, I wouldn't call it a revolution, a movement, perhaps is a better term to describe them if you want to describe them generically. Each of them had different well springs, right? In the case of Bangladesh, it was long, many years of rule, misrule, autocracy, corruption. In the case of Nepal, it was trying to grapple with a society that had seen an internal conflict, coming out of it with constant external intervention, particularly by New Delhi, and constricted governance, therefore, by a coalition that failed. But did the rulers, why did the rulers everywhere fail? I would rest my case by saying that there's something in this social media driven, super fast sharing of information without the sharing of understanding. And that may be a common factor in all 3. Whereas some regimes may need to have been toppled, some may not have needed toppling, they may have needed course correction, i.e. the one in Nepal. This is my belief, right? Whereas Sheikh Hasina, I wrote an article in the Hindu about riding the tiger, and I was certainly thought that she brought it upon herself. So social media may explain some of it. Lack of perspective and comparative study may explain some of it. As far as the UN is concerned, my own quick response would be, yes, the UN system has been weakened, but it has been weakened by us. And what do I mean by us? South Asia is a fourth of the world's population. South Asia has not spoken on Gaza. Our governments have not spoken on Gaza, neither have our civil society to any great volume and impact to impact our governments to speak about Gaza. So if Geneva is weak, if the General Assembly is weak, it's partly, if anybody is to blame, I think we South Asian citizens too are to blame. This is my understanding. Your question was about? Oh yeah, I think there I would say, going back to my point, and I sound like a broken record, the context of these younger generations, their lack of context and perspective. It would be very interesting to all around to understand what happened in Sri Lanka, how the hopes are not dashed or dashed, depending on who you speak to, right? To Bangladesh, what happened there? These three movements in three countries, as was referred to earlier, within 3 years. I think it would be a great opportunity to educate people of all ages in all these three countries as well as the rest of South Asia. I say that somebody's got to do it. Who will do it? That's the only question.
Thank you. Sultana?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
we'll just go around the thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So, just
Come this way.
yeah, just quickly on the UN and Gaza. I think the UN, as we have seen, needs huge laundering. You know, it has to be laundered for it to be relevant. The principles are there, of course. What's his name? The one from South Asia, South Africa, who resigned, UN human rights officer. And he keeps saying the principles are strong, the principles we believe in. The whole system, the architecture of it is deeply colonial, it is racist, and it has double standards. So unless that is rectified, the UN as it is really very, very questionable. And as far as I don't agree totally with Kanak, my country, of course, will not speak. It is only, you know, India always had a very strong position on Palestine, one of the first countries to have recognized Palestine and so on and so forth. Now it is totally on the other side. But equally, Sri Lanka has been extremely disappointing, both in terms of the government as well as civil society, I'm sorry to say. But Pakistan has been very strong. Pakistan has repeatedly, if you have seen their statements in the UN and otherwise, very strong. Yeah, Pakistan's response has been very strong. But also, as South Asians, we need a South Asian response. And this is what Kanak had. They had from Nepal drafted a question to their government saying, we need to know what is Nepal government's position on Gaza. And I feel that we should do that as a regional questioning of all our governments. What is your position? We know what colonial oppression is. And therefore, South Asia should come up with a very strong statement of questioning our governments is what is your position? Putting all of this together, and I think we can do much more on that. Thank you.
I think I just want to clarify one of my responses. I think usually when we talk about the youth, we think it's a homogeneous group. It is not. And we have to kind of make up our mind about how to engage with the youth and for what objective. Engagement with the youth is absolutely important in whichever sector you are working. There is no doubt in my mind about that. It is not that we are mentoring them or we are trying to teach them something. Nobody taught me anything. I charted my own course in human rights, and all my contemporaries did the same. So I don't believe in mentoring, but what I think is important is an exchange with the hope that the basic and core values that have so far served democracy, human rights well, are understood by them. I have no objections against people modifying things. On the UN, I have had a long association with UN. I think it's a very flawed system. When I reported to the General Assembly or to the Security Council, I had this sense that we are talking to governments, which is the UN, it's not the Secretary General. We are expecting them to respond to us positively on their shortcomings that we are making visible. So this is something we have to understand. Yet, I think a multilateral system would have served us well in this day and age. What you're seeing today is global bullying, unilateral decisions,
taken by one man, not even by one country. So Trump today has become the Security Council. He will deal with peace and security. He has become the WTO, who will deal with trade relations between countries. He will replace the humanitarian system that the UN has perfected. That is one system that the UN actually has perfected. And why and how they have been able to train to do it is in Gaza. How many years? Since 67. This is the humanitarian agency that has served Gaza. If we look at Gaza today, it becomes also important for us to understand that the youth is not homogeneous. Like you said, it is the youth in India. It is the youth in the United Kingdom. It is the youth in France. It is the youth in Canada that had pressured their governments to even show that symbolic action of recognizing the Palestinian state. It's the youth that has changed their minds. However much we in South Asia, we hold conferences, we hold demonstrations, it is their own youth, the changing perceptions of the youth that have pressured these governments. Their earlier stand was what? Israel has a right to self-defense, so they can decimate the whole of the Gaza Strip. So these are some of the things I think we as people understand. If we have these networks of people who are thinking in different ways, they sit together, they look at the diverse opinions that we have, and then see what the reality is. And why did I mention these journalists? I think it is these people who are bringing out the facts. We can't go everywhere and report and hold missions. But journalists are reporting from everywhere. The media is not trustworthy always, but at the same time, there are individual journalists who are giving us information, which becomes the credible source of our responses to these crises.
You wanted to? Okay.
Okay. I mostly agree with what the other speakers have already said. To go back to you, to respond to your question, you have to understand the history of Bangladesh to understand the present situation, what we are going through. Bangladesh was liberated in 1971, or we earned our liberation in 1971. And then in 75, the total thing changed. Okay, we were under a military government who were absolutely communal. They stricken off the of secularism from the constitution. They brought Islam as the state religion. And then with each regime, the narrative of the liberation war also changed. And the youth, again, I go back to Hina's statement that there's no homogeneous youth group in our country, okay? So there are different groups among the youth generation also. So they have different narratives about the history of Bangladesh in different regimes. So that's it. And then our education system was totally destroyed. And there was no secular education that I would say secular since 1975. So basically it was the Muslim fundamentalists who influenced the education system in Bangladesh, because we have many more madrasas than secular schools. All right? So, and then we have a young generation who actually don't know what the history of Bangladesh is. And when this revolution happened, when Dr. Yunus came to power, the first thing he said that we have pressed the reset button and we are erasing the 71 history totally. And Bangladesh starts from 24th July to 2025, okay? And then, as I said, this revolution was, the quote-unquote revolution started with the idea of having a non-discriminating society, okay? It was an anti-discrimination movement. But now, what is happening? The Islamists have taken over, so there's discrimination against the non-Muslim minorities, Hindu, Christians, Buddhists, Ahmadiyyas, Shias, the indigenous people, everybody is suffering. And also there's a very clear drive against women's rights. And they have taken over the whole kind of, they have filled the vacuum.
because we didn't have any viable opposition, political opposition to Sheikh Hasina. And Sheikh Hasina's, one of the very basic, I would say, mistakes was to concentrate on destroying BNP and not looking at anything else. That the other anti-Hasina groups are actually organizing to fill the vacuum. She didn't take any notice of that. Even though we tried to draw her attention to that, she never paid any attention because she became so kind of autocratic and disconnected from that. And there, of course, comes the responsibility of the civil society, no doubt about that, but civil society cannot do much unless there is a political support to the whole endeavors and efforts of the civil society. And we didn't have any viable political force to really support the civil society movements. Okay, so there was a big vacuum everywhere. And to go back to your question that what can we learn? The learning is that we have to connect. And the politicians have to learn how to connect with the people. That is one of the most important lessons we should learn.
Thank you. Syeda, do you want to use the final 60 seconds to respond?
No, I just want to, Nimalka's point about the United Nations. 100 years, Patrice Lumumba, Congo. We recently did a play on Patrice Lumumba's visit. His spirit visits the United Nations. And the United Nations is the most ineffective instrument, and all he has are 3 bullets that were fired into him, and he throws it at the United Nations. So I kept on thinking when you talked, I kept on thinking it's 100 years since Patrice Lumumba, and that is, the United Nations. The last thing I want to say is that I visit Palestinian ambassador once in a while, and lined in his office are, and I'm talking only of India, are Arafat's photographs with all the leaders of the freedom movement, whoever was alive at that time. Gandhi was not. So the fact that Pakistan has spoken, but we have not spoken. But there are spurts here and there, but those are not earth-shattering. So these are the realities, but I keep thinking we should not lose hope, but I want to grapple and I want to cling on to some hope at the end of this wonderful gathering. Thank you, Nimal.
Thank you. So I'll, Hina, just one minute for you.
Not less than a minute.
Okay.
Just to respond, yes, the United Nations has been ineffective in creating the protection that we expect from it. These are realities, but these are realities we want to change. So if you have a headache, you don't cut the head off, you find a remedy for it. We want to reform the United Nations, but we still want the United Nations because it is through pressure on our own countries that we can make the United Nations stronger. And I think that's our role. But if we give up these multilateral organizations, there will be nothing left. So change them, reform them. That should be our aspiration rather than getting rid of them. Then there will be nothing else, except Mr. McDonald Trump.
Thank you, Hina. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. So I think there is some hope still. We were talking about a South Asian response and what we can do, not just to beat our chests and say that everything is lost, but there is something to look forward to. Diksha, would you like to come up? And as I said, there will be some hope.
Let me thank the panelists for answering some very complex questions.
And I think there'll be more time for conversation over food in the garden. But as our final task for today, I would like to take this opportunity to also introduce you to the South Asian Councillors for Human Rights, Peace and Democracy, a group of eminent individuals who will be a credible voice for South Asia. The South Asian Councillors will be, who have spoken to you today as well, as Hina, Jilani, Syeda, Hameed, Sultana, Kamal, Kanak, Dixit. They've been introduced, so I'm not going to give their long bios. But also not here today are Dr. Hamida Hossain, a leading women's rights activist and an academic in Bangladesh and founder of Aino Salish Kendra, and Dr. Seema Samar from Afghanistan, a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and the first Minister of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan. And she's a former UN Special Rapporteur as well. So to speak more about the mandate of the South Asian Councillors, I would like to invite Kanak to quickly speak for 5 minutes and introduce.
Thank you. It's already been a long evening, so I'll be very, very brief. Yes, we essentially promulgated the South Asia Councillors for Human Rights, Democracy and Peace this morning. What we hope to do is to be, as one of us suggested, be a convening place for the ideas that need to be activated in this region that holds a fourth of the world's population. And it goes beyond imagination to think the level of distress in this region. And much of it begins with the lack of human rights, the lack of democracy or the weakening of democracy, and the lack of peace. So that is the arena that this group will work. Our secretariat will be SAHR, South Asian for Human Rights, and loosely the kind of activities we hope to do, as we discussed today. It'll be a consensus-driven organization. It'll also open up to, not an organization, a group. It'll also open up to more members down the line. The idea is to fight authoritarianism, or to take a position against authoritarianism, sectarianism, communalism, to delve into the causes and consequences of conflict, to deal with inequality and social justice, and particularly important in South Asia, the matter of refugees and migrants. And we are human rights, we are people thus far, people with individuals with background in human rights, but coming from diverse fields, from journalism to law. And what we hope to do initially through statements on areas that we feel are important for South Asians to grapple with. Over time, we will probably evolve into doing more, from taking up the issue of, let's say, the climate crisis that is going to devastate such a huge proportion of the population of South Asia, from the coastal areas to the Himalaya. From that to issues of public health, to strengthening of regional cooperation, the irrelevance presently of SARC, how to make it relevant, engaging with the leaders of South Asia in what some of us termed private diplomacy, to reach out to them rather than wish them away, which they will not go away, as we all know, and drawing attention to human rights issues. So it's an organization that hopefully will, it's a group that hopefully will gather energy and momentum as we go along. But we had a very, very intense and engaged conversation all of this morning in terms of the modalities of our work and how to proceed. But we do hope that this entity, this group, will act as a voice of reason and a voice of watchdogging for all that we need to think of in days ahead. I'm just thinking as I speak before you, it's important to grapple with how to reach out to our populations. What is the kind of information, knowledge, etc., that is not being passed on in this age when information is supposed to be in everybody's handycam and in his handheld phone. But we did decide on one point that is concrete at the end of it. Most of it was modalities and issues, and to make sure that we are on the same page. But the one issue that we decided on is that our first statement from South Asia to the people of South Asia and to the governments of South Asia and to the world would be on Gaza. Thank you.